German automakers are known for being a pretty pragmatic bunch, except for when it comes to these so-called SUV coupes they're all building these days. Just take this GLE class from Mercedes-Benz. It's not that it isn't useful, it's just not as useful as the regular version. And there's no shame in sacrificing some functionality in the name of fashion, but you should know there's a price to pay for doing it. For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that. Let me just pause really quick to alleviate some of your concerns ahead of time. I really do think the Mercedes GLE class is one of the best SUVs in the segment, and most of the reasons why also apply to this coupe version, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But whether we're talking about the GLE or any of the other vehicles I review, my job isn't to provide confirmation bias, it's to lay out the pros and cons so you can make the most informed purchase decision possible. Criticism? It's just that, criticism. It's not an attack. And it's usually based on my experience with other vehicles and how the one I am currently driving stacks up. And that preamble isn't to justify what I'm saying, but it should give you a little bit of context about how I approach my reviews every single week. And it's not that all vehicles have to make good practical sense either, although some issues with utility and usefulness I just can't ignore, and that is very much the case here. But before we get to that, I do think we should go over pricing. And for 2022, the GLE Coupe starts at $86,600 Canadian, and then there's an AMG version that's about 11 grand more than this. And you know, that's reasonably priced, although the BMW X6 is a few grand less. But my bigger problem is I can't even make it out of the Mercedes lineup with having a massive question, because if you look at the standard GLE class, it starts at 14 grand less than this. And to be fair, that is for the GLE 350, which uses a turbocharged 4-cylinder instead of this 6-cylinder. But that's besides the point, because if you take a look at the GLE with this same engine, the GLE 450, it's still $6,000 less. How can you ignore that? Just looking at the dollars and cents, that means you could get a regular GLE 450 with more than half the options I have in this one for the same starting price as this. Again, that is just very difficult for me to look past. And then on top of that, there is that AMG version I mentioned. Now for 2022, there's only the AMG 53, which uses an upgraded version of this engine. Like I said, it's 11 grand more, but as far as price difference goes, it is the best value because it's only $1,000 more to go with the coupe over the standard version. But I definitely don't think you need to upgrade. There's more than enough power here. And overall, this is just a very nice vehicle to drive. But we'll get to all of that stuff a little later because we have something to talk about first. Consider this a lesson in less is more economics, because you're paying quite a bit more for this GLE class coupe and getting quite a bit less space back in return. And it's like I said off the top, it's not that it's totally useless, it's just not as useful as the regular version. I think there's 165 liters less space behind the back seats. There's 780 or so total. And it's less about the numbers and more about the overall shape of the space. Just take a look. The slope back here means you don't get as much upright room as you would normally get in an SUV. That means this is fine for day-to-day stuff like groceries or even a couple's weekend away, but where you're gonna run into problems is when you try to load this thing up for that family trip up to the cottage. Now, the shape of this thing does cause some problems in the passenger compartment, starting with headroom. There's about 2 inches less in the back than you get in the regular GLE class, but even up front, I definitely feel more claustrophobic in here than I do in the regular version. I noticed the first time I got in. Also, the shape of these doors make it kind of awkward to get inside, especially for a big guy like me. And then my last problem with the shape of the back end, outward visibility isn't great. When you look in that rearview mirror, it's like looking through a mail slot in a door. It's definitely an adjustment, and it's not something I was necessarily expecting. But on the bright side, there is a ton of legroom in the back. That part is great. It's only the headroom that could be a problem if you're shopping for an SUV for a growing family. if you can look past those limitations, I really do think this is one of the best in the segment, and it applies to this one, like I said, just like the regular GLE. A big reason why is it's just very approachable, and this infotainment system, it's pretty solid. I've got this massive touchscreen up here, but one complaint that I mentioned before, and in just about every other Mercedes review I have done, for whatever reason, this brand cannot figure out how to have widescreen Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so you get this shrunken format. It looks really weird. I think I used the analogy last time that it's like watching an old 4x3 DVD on a modern widescreen TV. It just looks really weird, and at least if you look at Hyundai and Kia, when it's the smaller format, it just moves it off to the left-hand side, so then you can have another feature up on the right. But this one, you don't get that. You get these black bars on either side, and it is just not all that nice, and it definitely doesn't feel as upscale as the rest of the vehicle. And something else I've noticed about this GLE Coupe, and again, it's one of those things that comes with my job. Turn the radio off so I can do this video. When you're talking to yourself in a car, you notice a few things. One of the things I noticed here, there is this very bizarre echo when I'm talking, bouncing off the windshield. I think it's the shape, it's that slope, it's different than the regular GLE, so I didn't run into it in that one, but here it is very weird. It's like an echo chamber, literally. I can just hear my voice bouncing off the windshield very awkwardly. It almost sounds like I'm underwater. But getting back to the good stuff, like I said earlier, there's no GLE 350 version of the Coupe. There's only the 450, and that means you skip the base 4-cylinder and head straight for this 3-liter straight 6. And I do have to say, I was surprised by that engine when I tested the GLE 350. You can go ahead and watch that review. We'll throw a link up in the top here, but just know it's a great engine on its own, but this one is so silky smooth, and even just the way the ignition stop-start system works is way better. There's no starter motor here. It uses an electric motor that replaces the starter motor, and it's just seamless when it's shutting down and starting back up again, whereas that one can be pretty jarring. And something else that's a little jarring, this 9-speed automatic transmission. There's some harsh shifts, especially low first to second. That jump is very strange, and when I put it in reverse, and I am willing to chalk it up to the newness of this one I'm driving, because it's barely out of its break-in period right now as I'm driving it. And I haven't had any of those issues with any of the other Mercedes I've driven that use this same transmission. So just know that if you do buy one, you might experience some shudders, but it definitely smooths out with time. So why do me and just about every other automotive enthusiast like straight sixes so much? It's because they are buttery smooth, and this one is no exception. It's also got tons of torque, and that's the one that matters most because it's what gets you moving. This makes 362 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque, and you get all of that last one as low as 1600 RPM. So it's nice and low in the rev range. There's no waiting for it. And then you have that mild hybrid system that kicks in with some electrons to smooth things out and make it just a little bit quicker. But that also powers a 48-volt system that runs the accessories, which reduces the load on the engine, and that improves the fuel efficiency. Now, this thing does run on premium gas because it's a Mercedes, but it doesn't burn as much as it would if it didn't have that mild hybrid setup. Now, officially, it's good for 9.6 liters per 100 kilometers combined. And again, that is premium grade gas. But I did a bit better than that the other day when I went on my evaluation drive, a little more than 200 kilometers. And I burned right around 9.4 liters per 100 kilometers. And considering the snow that I was driving through, I was pretty happy with that number. And to give you a little context, back when I tested the GLE 350, I burned about 9.1 liters per 100 kilometers over the identical evaluation loop. So it just goes to show you that this thing isn't bad, especially considering it is wintertime. That one was back in the fall, so this is pretty impressive. Now, I've been driving it for the better part of a week, and I'm up just beyond 10 liters per 100 kilometers now, but I'm still pretty happy with that number considering the size of this thing and the fact it has standard full-time all-wheel drive. Now, something I wish it had, air suspension, and I've kind of gone back and forth on that recently because I didn't think it was necessary before, and I still don't think it's explicitly necessary, but I was fine without it until I tested the Mercedes E450 All-Terrain that has standard air suspension, and it is just so good. It elevates these products to a new level of ride quality. Right up here, we've got some bumps. They're a little jarring for a premium product, but with that air suspension, it just absorbs this stuff without any trouble. So I do wish it was here, but again, it's not too bad. It's just a little bit stiff. The other thing you have to worry about is that you can feel the unsprung weight of the wheels pulling at the suspension when you go over rough surfaces like that. And back when I tested the GLE 350, I said the same thing, but it applies here again. I actually had to get out and double check to make sure that these were just 20-inch alloys, because I thought for sure they were bigger, just based on the sensation of the wheels pulling at the shocks and springs. You can really feel it happening, but there's just a nice substance to this vehicle. It feels really solid, and that is classic Mercedes-Benz. And it also makes this a great highway cruiser, although that air suspension would make it even better. So my verdict still stands. I don't think you need the air suspension, but for the few grand it adds to the price of the GLE, I definitely think it's worth considering. But something else you might want to consider as well is that E450 all-terrain. It doesn't have quite as much room in the second row, but there's tons of cargo room. It looks really cool, and it comes with the air suspension standard for $81,700 before freight and tax. That's something I would definitely keep in mind. But going back to this thing out on the highway, it is really nice, and there is a full suite of advanced driver aids that have been added to this one that make it just so nice to cruise around in. It is a great adaptive cruise control system. It works well with lane keep assist, and it will apply steering assistance as long as you have both hands on the wheel. It's really cool the way it works, but that is the key. You need to keep your hands on the wheel, but you can feel it as it goes through bends on the highway. It is great. Overall, it's just a nicely balanced highway driving aid, and it'll even provide some steering assistance through curves in the highway if you keep your hands on the wheel. But if you let go, it'll have some warnings, it'll beep and flash at you. And if you continue to ignore the warnings, Mercedes says it'll shut the system off, and it can even stop the vehicle in certain conditions. And I gotta say, back when I tested that E-Class, some guy claiming to be an E-Class owner challenged me in the comment section to prove to him at what point, when you let go, does it stop the system? And I'm gonna give you guys the same answer I gave him. I don't know, and I don't care to find out. These are not self-driving systems, they are driver aids. Driving with no hands on the wheel, that is dangerous and dumb, and you're not gonna catch me doing it until those really advanced systems come out, and this is not one of them. But again, you don't even have to grip the wheel super tight in order for it to work, and it really does help take some of the stress out of the highway drive. And that also means this is a great long-haul highway cruiser, although adding massaging seats as well as that air suspension would be a couple of nice touches to really make this perfect. But then again, if you take a look at the price tag, this one is at $96,700 before freight and tax. So if you added those features, it would easily push this above the 100 grand mark, and that is a tough pill to swallow. But it also makes a case for considering the regular GLE as well as that E450 all-terrain if you're looking to save a bit of money. I'm not saying you have to do it, but you're definitely going to want to take all of that into consideration before you make up your mind. To recap, I like how well-rounded the GLE-Class Coupe's drive is, the advanced driver aids you can get with it, and that buttery straight six. I don't like how expensive it is as a styling upgrade, the limited overall utility it offers, or that this one doesn't have air suspension. Look, needs vary as much as taste, so there's no single right answer of whether or not this will work for you. There are limitations that come with a swoopy sport utility like this, that much is obvious. But whether you're talking about this coupe version or the regular GLE class, this is easily one of the most well-rounded entries in the segment. Sacrificing space in the name of style, it's not an outrageous idea, but it is one you should consider carefully before signing on the dotted line.